It began with a discovery that no parent, no child, and no community could ever truly erase from their minds. Inside the long, cold hallway of an abandoned wing of a small-town Ohio high school, janitors stumbled upon a locker, rusted, forgotten, hidden behind stacks of unused desks. But it wasn't the locker itself that froze their breath in their lungs. It was what they found inside, a crumpled school uniform, deep scratch marks etched into the metal walls, and a faint odor that whispered of something far more sinister. The town of Maplewood, Ohio, was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. A quiet, working-class community where neighbors waved at each other from their porches, and the loudest sound at night was the chirping of crickets. But in the fall of 2004, Maplewood's illusion of safety shattered, leaving behind questions that no one wanted to ask out loud. How could a teacher, a figure of trust, authority, and responsibility, commit an act so unthinkable? And more terrifyingly, how had it gone unnoticed for weeks? The victim was a 15-year-old boy named Daniel Cooper, bright-eyed, shy, and often overlooked by his classmates. He was the kind of kid who sat in the back row doodling superheroes in the margins of his notebook, rarely speaking unless called upon. Teachers described him as polite, though distant. Students described him as easy to miss. But one teacher, a man by the name of Mr. Leonard Graves, noticed him all too well. Graves had taught history at Maplewood High for nearly 20 years. To parents, he was charismatic, charming, the kind of man who always stayed after school to help the kids. But to his students, there was something off about him. His smile lingered too long. His eyes seemed to scan the hallways like a predator waiting for a mistake. Most dismissed it as paranoia, after all. He had tenure, glowing reviews, and a spotless record. No one suspected what he was truly capable of. The story began to unravel on a cold October morning when Daniel failed to show up for class. At first, no one thought much of it. Teenagers skipped school all the time. But when the days turned into weeks, panic began to spread. Flyers plastered the telephone poles. His pictures circulated in the local paper, and his mother's cries echoed on every evening news broadcast. "Where's my son?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. Police scoured the woods, combed through abandoned houses, and even drained parts of the nearby lake. But every lead went cold. It was as if Daniel had vanished into thin air. And yet he hadn't. He was there the entire time, just a few feet away from his classmates, hidden in plain sight. The first real break in the case came not from the police, but from a student named Emily Carter. She had been walking past the East Wing, a wing that had been closed down years earlier after asbestos was discovered. She heard something faint. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a weak, muffled sound like someone tapping on metal. She stopped, pressed her ear against the old lockers, and swore she heard a voice, whispered, begging, crying. She ran straight to the principal's office. At first, they didn't believe her. Kids told ghost stories about the East Wing all the time. But Emily wouldn't let it go. Shaking, pale, and on the verge of tears, she insisted they check. And when the janitor pried open one of the lockers, the nightmare revealed itself. Daniel was inside. Malnourished, barely conscious. His skin pale as paper, his lips cracked, his fingernails bloody from clawing at the metal walls. He had been locked inside for nearly 3 weeks. But here's the question that haunted everyone. How had he survived? And why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? The answer, investigators would later discover, was more horrifying than the act itself. Someone had been feeding him, slipping scraps of food, sips of water, enough to keep him alive, but not enough to set him free. That someone was Mr. Graves. The police arrested him that very evening, dragging him out of his classroom in front of horrified students. He went quietly, not a word, not a struggle, his face as calm as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. But the terror did not end with his arrest, because the more investigators dug, the darker the story became. Inside his desk drawer, they found journals, dozens of them, each page filled with twisted fantasies, meticulous notes about his students, their routines, their fears, their vulnerabilities, and Daniel's name appeared more than any other. "He's too quiet," one entry read. "Too easy to forget. No one will notice if he disappears." The town of Maplewood was paralyzed. Parents pulled their children out of school. Teachers resigned in shame. And for Daniel, the scars ran far deeper than the scratches on his arms. He refused to speak of what happened inside that locker. Whenever asked, he would go silent, his eyes staring off as though he was still trapped inside, listening to the echo of his own heartbeat against cold metal walls. But the story doesn't end there, because, as investigators would soon discover, Daniel's survival was not a miracle. It was part of a plan that hinted at something even more disturbing. The discovery of Daniel Cooper alive inside that locker should have been the ending of a nightmare. But in many ways, it was only the beginning. Detectives scoured the school for evidence, trying to piece together how a respected teacher could pull off something so brazen under everyone's noses. What they found turned Maplewood's stomach inside out. Hidden behind a false panel in Graves' classroom closet was a small crawl space. And inside were empty water bottles, protein bar wrappers, and notebooks filled with disturbing sketches, drawings of lockers, hallways, and crude figures labeled with the names of students. Each sketch seemed to represent not just Daniel, but others. Kids who had long since graduated, some who had left town, and some who were never accounted for. Police began pulling old files, reopening cases of missing children that had gone cold decades earlier. A boy in 1998, a girl in 1993, each one a Maplewood student, each one described as quiet, introverted, or easily overlooked. The coincidences piled up like bricks in a tomb. Had Graves been stalking his students for years? And if so, where were the bodies? Daniel, fragile and traumatized, was unable to answer. In fact, he barely spoke at all. The doctors said he was suffering from severe psychological shock, malnutrition, and dehydration. His throat was raw, his voice hoarse, as though he had spent weeks screaming in a space where no one could hear him. The most he ever whispered, according to a nurse, was 4 chilling words. He said, "I'm next." The town erupted in panic. Parents refused to let their children out of sight. The school board resigned in disgrace. Reporters swarmed Maplewood, turning its quiet streets into a circus of flashing cameras and microphones. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why? Why would a teacher, entrusted with the lives of children, do something so monstrous? But when investigators questioned Graves, they were met with something far worse than answers: silence. He sat in the interrogation room, hands folded neatly in front of him, his face calm, even serene. The only movement was his eyes, watching the detectives like a man amused by a private joke. Hours passed. Not a single word. Not a single confession. Then, just as they were about to end the session, Graves leaned forward and whispered something that froze the blood of every man in that room. "You didn't find all the lockers." Detectives tore the school apart from top to bottom. They pried open lockers, ripped down walls, and even dug beneath the gymnasium floor. What they discovered was worse than anything they had prepared for. In the East Wing, behind a crumbling plaster wall, they uncovered a row of sealed lockers, ancient, rusted, hidden from plain sight. And inside them, the remains of children long gone. The town's worst fears had come true. Daniel had not been the first. He was simply the latest. The media dubbed Graves the Locker Man, a name that echoed across every newspaper and television screen in America. He became a symbol of betrayal, a monster hiding in plain sight, a predator who turned a place of learning into a tomb. But the most unsettling part, investigators couldn't determine exactly how many victims there had been. The journals were filled with names, dates, even cryptic codes no one could decipher. For every set of remains they uncovered, there were at least 2 or 3 names with no bodies to match. To this day, no one knows how many children Leonard Graves claimed as his own. And then there was Daniel. Survivors of trauma often hold fragments of the truth, broken pieces of a larger puzzle. But Daniel's silence was different. It wasn't just fear. It was as if Graves had planted something inside his mind, a lingering shadow that refused to let go. Nurses reported that he often woke up screaming in the middle of the night, begging not to be chosen. Teachers, doctors, even priests tried to comfort him. Nothing worked. His eyes always darted to the corners of the room as though someone, something was still watching. Years later, when Daniel was finally able to speak about his ordeal, his words shocked investigators once again. He claimed that Graves had never intended to kill him. Not immediately. He said the teacher whispered through the slits in the locker door at night, promising that Daniel would be special, that he would carry on the tradition. Chilling words, hinting at something no one wanted to believe. That Graves wasn't just creating victims, he was trying to create an accomplice. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Graves was found guilty on multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and child endangerment. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even in shackles, he never stopped smiling. And in his final statement, before being led away, he spoke just one last sentence. "There are more lockers than you'll ever find." To this day, the old East Wing of Maplewood High remains sealed. The lockers, the walls, even the classrooms are locked behind chains and warning signs. Locals say at night, if you walk too close, you can still hear faint scratching from inside. The sound of fingernails on metal. Desperate. Endless. Daniel Cooper eventually left Ohio, changing his name, trying to erase the past. But the scars never faded. And when asked years later if he had ever truly moved on, he gave a reply that sent shivers through everyone who heard it. "I don't check closets anymore. I check lockers." And with that, dear listener, remember this. Evil doesn't always lurk in dark alleys or abandoned houses. Sometimes it wears a tie, stands at a blackboard, and waits for the final bell to ring. Sleep well tonight, if you can. If you want more chilling stories like this one, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. But be warned, once you step into the darkness, it's hard to close the door.